The red and blue lights from the patrol car painted the cul-de-sac in a cruel strobe, bouncing off mailboxes, garage doors, and the polished chrome of parked SUVs. I stood on my driveway with my arms crossed, trying to look calm, though inside my chest thundered with anger. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and cracked open doors, their whispers threading the night like a low hiss of static. And there he was, the new HOA president, strutting across the pavement like he owned every inch of it. He was young, sharp suit hanging off his wiry frame, clipboard clutched like a weapon. His smirk said it all. I have the power. I can summon the law. Officers, he announced, waving toward me as if presenting a criminal to the jury. This man refuses to comply with the HOA bylaws. He's putting the community at risk. The taller of the two officers adjusted his belt, frowning. Sir, what's this about? Before I could speak, the president interrupted me. He's not allowed to park his truck in his own driveway overnight. It's against the HOA standards. I told him, I sent him letters, and he said. He paused, mock-quoting me with venom in his voice. I'm not in your HOA. A ripple of murmurs spread among the neighbors watching. Some stifled laughs, others gasped. My jaw tightened. I finally stepped forward, my voice low but carrying in the still night air. That's exactly what I said. Because I'm not in his HOA. He doesn't have authority over my property. The officers exchanged glances, unsure. The younger one glanced at the president. Is his property actually under your HOA? The smirk faltered just a fraction. Well, it borders the association. Technically, the bylaws should... No, I cut in sharp and clear. My patience snapped. This man has been harassing me for weeks, claiming rules don't apply to him, but do to me. And now he's wasting police time because he doesn't like that I won't bow to his little clipboard dictatorship. For the first time that night, the president's voice cracked. You can't talk to me like that. I am the HOA president. My word is law here. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh, but my chest was still tight. My words sliced through the thick silence. You think you're the law? You don't even know who you're messing with. The taller officer held up a hand, trying to de-escalate the situation. All right, let's calm down. But the words were already out, spilling into the open like gasoline on fire. I took a step closer, meeting the president's narrowing eyes. Because here's the truth you didn't bother to check before calling the cops on me. You may be HOA president, but I'm your new landlord. The smirk drained from his face like water down a sink. Gasps echoed from the small crowd gathering. One of the officers arched a brow. The other's mouth opened slightly, as if even he couldn't believe what I'd just said. The president stammered. Well, what do you mean? The air hung heavy, like the pause before a storm breaks. My pulse pounded in my ears. I could see every detail, the beads of sweat forming at his temple, the way his knuckles whitened around that clipboard, the uncertain shifting of neighbors on their lawns as they tried to piece it all together. I didn't answer him. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch, let him squirm under the weight of it. Because the truth, the one thing that would flip this entire confrontation on its head, was about to detonate like a grenade. And as the officers leaned in, waiting, and the neighbors held their collective breath, the question burned in everyone's mind. How could the man who claimed absolute control over me actually be living on land that belonged to me? I should have seen it coming the day he moved in. It was a humid summer afternoon when the moving trucks rolled into the cul-de-sac. I was trimming the hedges along my driveway, sweat dripping down my neck, when I noticed him for the first time. A man in his mid-30s, thin as a rail, pacing back and forth in pressed slacks and a tucked-in dress shirt, barking orders at the movers like he was orchestrating a military operation. He didn't lift a single box, didn't break a sweat, just pointed and complained. I thought to myself, this one's trouble. My name's Tom. I'm 60, retired now after 3 decades in construction management. I've got the kind of hands that still bear the marks of calluses, the kind of back that aches when the weather changes, and the kind of patience that's been hard-earned from years of keeping crews in line and deadlines met. When my wife passed 5 years ago, this house became my anchor. Paid off, modest, quiet. It was more than a home. It was my last piece of stability. I've lived in this neighborhood long enough to know everyone's name, their kids and their dogs. We look out for each other here, or at least we used to. That first week, the new guy, his name was Derek, showed up at my door. He was younger than most of the folks here, mid-30s, sharp jaw, neatly parted hair. He introduced himself with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm the new HOA president," he said, shaking my hand like he was sealing a business deal. His grip was firm, almost performative. "I just wanted to welcome you to a new era for the neighborhood. Things are going to be a bit more orderly around here." I raised a brow. "Well, Derek, welcome to the block, but I'm not part of the HOA. My property line is outside the association. Always has been." For a split second, his smile twitched. Then it snapped back into place. "Oh, well, I'm sure we can clear that up. Boundaries change. Bylaws evolve. You'll want to be a team player." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. At first, I brushed him off. I figured he was just puffing his chest. But over the next few weeks, Derek made himself impossible to ignore. It started small. A note tucked under my windshield wiper. "Truck parking in driveways discouraged after 10 p.m. I crumpled it and tossed it. Then came the letters. Official looking, printed with HOA letterhead. "Notice of violation. Please remove unapproved lawn ornamentation." It was referring to the bird bath my wife had loved, the one that had been in my yard for 15 years. I called him. "Derek, I told you, I'm not in your HOA. Stop sending me these." His voice was smug over the line. "Everyone benefits from uniform standards. It's for the good of the community." The real gut punch came a month later. I got home from a grocery run and found bright orange stickers slapped across my mailbox. Non-compliant, subject to fines, fines, on my property. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a campaign. See, Derek wasn't content with running his HOA. He wanted control over everything and everyone around him. And I, being outside his reach, was like a thorn in his side. He couldn't stand that someone on his street lived free of his rules. Neighbors began to whisper about him. The single mom down the street told me Derek had fined her $200 for leaving her garbage cans out a day too long. An older couple got cited for having non-regulation paint on their shutters. People grumbled, but no one wanted to confront him. He was sharp, cunning, and most of all, intimidating. And Derek knew it. He thrived on that fear. For me, it was different. I'd buried a wife, raised 2 kids, and managed crews of 50 stubborn men. I wasn't about to bow to a 35-year-old with a clipboard, but that didn't mean his games didn't wear me down. Every time I walked outside and saw one of his violation notices stuck somewhere on my property, my blood pressure spiked. I couldn't relax in my own home without wondering what stunt he'd pull next. Sleep got harder. The meals tasted bitter. Even the sound of paper against my door made me jump, expecting another bogus citation. And all the while, Derek strutted around the neighborhood like a king inspecting his castle. He'd stroll past with that smug grin, clipboard tucked under his arm, offering sarcastic waves as if daring me to react. Then came the night he called the cops. It was the culmination of weeks of harassment, every petty act stacking on the next until it felt like I was living under siege. That night, when the flashing lights hit the street, I realized just how far he was willing to go. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he'd made a fatal mistake. Because while he was busy trying to bully me into submission, I'd been quietly sitting on a piece of information that would flip the entire game upside down. See, before Derek moved in, his property, that pristine, freshly painted house with the manicured lawn, had been tied up in an estate sale. A complicated mess, but one I'd been watching closely. I'd spent years investing in small rental properties around town, buying when the market dipped, managing them myself. I never flaunted it. Most of my neighbors thought I was just a retired construction guy mowing his lawn. But Derek's house, I owned it, bought fair and square, tucked under one of my LLCs. He was a tenant, not a king. The irony was too delicious to spoil early. I kept that card close to my chest, waiting, biding my time. And now, standing under the glare of police lights, with Derek barking orders and claiming dominion over me, that secret was finally ready to surface. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about a driveway, a truck, or some ridiculous bird bath. It was about dignity, about not being trampled by someone who mistook arrogance for authority. And as the officers leaned in, skeptical but curious, I realized the war had only just begun. The morning after Derek called the cops on me, the neighborhood was buzzing. I couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of curious eyes on me. Curtains fluttered, whispers passed across lawns. Some neighbors gave me sympathetic nods, but most just avoided eye contact. People here were terrified of Derek. They had to live under his thumb, or so they thought. I carried my coffee to the porch and sat in my favorite old rocking chair, the wood creaking softly as I leaned back. My truck gleamed in the driveway, a silent middle finger to Derek's so-called bylaws. It was peaceful for all of 5 minutes before I noticed him striding past, clipboard in hand as always. He slowed, angled his chin toward me, and smiled like a wolf. "You made quite a scene last night," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, probing for weakness. I sipped my coffee. "You wasted police resources. I should be the one filing a report." He shrugged. "HOA enforcement is a community priority. You'll come around." I chuckled dryly. "Not a chance." His smile tightened. "We'll see about that." And that was the beginning of his campaign. The next week, I started getting letters. Not just the occasional violation notice, but a flood of them. Slipped under my door, taped to my fence, even mailed to me with certified delivery. Each one carried some new absurd accusation. Grass height exceeds the regulation. It didn't. Unapproved modifications to exterior lighting. I'd changed a bulb. Truck parked in violation of community standards. Still not in his HOA. Every letter ended the same way. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action. Neighbors told me Derek had been boasting at the clubhouse about how he was breaking me down. He bragged that no one had ever resisted him this long. I didn't respond to a single letter, but inside the stress was eating at me. Every time I opened the mailbox, I felt a jolt of anger and dread. My hands shook as I crumpled those papers, stuffing them into a growing pile in the corner of my garage. Then came the little acts of sabotage. My trash cans, neatly set by the curb, started mysteriously tipping over at night. Once I found my bird bath cracked clean down the middle, as if someone had swung a bat at it. Another morning, I woke to see eggs splattered across my truck's windshield. Of course, there were no witnesses, no cameras. Just smirk from Derek when he strolled by. "You should get better security," he said once, nodding toward the cracked bird bath. "Neighborhood can be rough." I clenched my jaw. "Funny, it was peaceful until you moved in." By mid-fall, Derek escalated to fines. Thick envelopes began arriving, stamped with HOA insignia, demanding hundreds of dollars for ongoing non-compliance. He even claimed my mailbox, which had been standing for 20 years, was unapproved design. The ridiculous part? Some neighbors actually paid their fines. They told me they couldn't afford to fight him in court, couldn't risk liens on their homes. Derek thrived on that fear. He knew most people would fold, but not me. I stacked the envelopes in a shoebox and ignored them. Every letter, every threat only hardened my resolve. Things reached a boiling point when Derek summoned me to a mandatory compliance hearing at the community clubhouse. I almost laughed when I read the notice. Mandatory? For a homeowner outside his jurisdiction? Still, I decided to go. Sometimes it's better to look your enemy in the eye. The clubhouse was fluorescent lit, rows of folding chairs filled with nervous neighbors. Derek stood at the front, gavel in hand, wearing a suit far too polished for a neighborhood meeting. He called the room to order like he was presiding over a courtroom. "Tom," he said, pointing at me, "you stand accused of repeated and willful violations of HOA bylaws." I crossed my arms. "I'm not in your HOA. This whole circus is a joke." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Derek slammed his gavel. "Order! You will respect this process." I scanned the room. Faces shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided my gaze, but a few, like old Mrs. Patterson in the front row, gave me subtle nods of support. They wanted me to fight back. They just couldn't do it themselves. Derek launched into a tirade about community values and standards of excellence. He waved photos of my truck, my mailbox, my cracked bird bath, as if they were evidence of crimes against humanity. Finally, I raised a hand. Derek, let me ask you one thing. Can you produce a single piece of legal documentation proving my property is under your HOA? The room fell silent. Derek's jaw tightened. The boundaries? No, I cut him off. Not boundaries, not suggestions. Legal proof. Show us. He froze, eyes darting. For the first time, his confidence faltered. But then he slammed the gavel again, regaining his bluster. This hearing is adjourned. Fines will continue until compliance is achieved. I walked out, head high, heart pounding. I'd rattled him, but I knew he wasn't done. By winter, Derek's harassment had reached a fever pitch. I couldn't enjoy a quiet evening without hearing his voice on the street, lecturing neighbors about eyesores and violations. I couldn't mow my lawn without seeing him snapping photos from the sidewalk. I couldn't even visit my daughter across town without worrying what I'd find when I got back. The stress was constant, a low-grade fever of anger and dread. My blood pressure climbed. Sleep came in fragments. Meals went unfinished. Yet beneath it all, I clung to one secret, one ace in the hole, my ownership of his house. Every time Derek puffed his chest, every time he slapped another bogus fine on my door, I reminded myself, he thinks he owns me, but he lives on land that belongs to me. The irony was almost unbearable, and when the time came, I knew it would crush him. It happened one cold January morning. I stepped outside to find a bright red sign staked into my yard. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering, pointing. My face burned with rage. Derek stood across the street, hands in his pockets, smirk wide as the horizon. That was it. The line had been crossed. I ripped the sign from the ground, my hands shaking. "You're done, Derek," I shouted across the street. "You hear me? Done." He laughed, actually laughed. "You'll never win. No one beats me." But he didn't know. He didn't know that the trap was already set, the proof already gathered. Because while he'd been busy tormenting me, I'd been pulling records, gathering documents, and preparing for the moment when his entire empire would crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. And that moment was coming sooner than he could imagine. The day of the showdown came wrapped in the stale scent of coffee and the low hum of fluorescent lights. The hearing had been scheduled by Derek himself. He called it a special HOA emergency session at the community clubhouse. Notices had been shoved into every mailbox, urging residents to attend, warning that ongoing non-compliance threatens the community's integrity. I knew what it really was. Derek's attempt at a public spectacle, a trial where he could humiliate me in front of everyone. He wanted to prove no one could stand against him. Good. Let him. Because what Derek didn't know was that this stage he'd built for himself was about to become the scene of his downfall. When I arrived, the clubhouse was already packed. Folding chairs filled the room, neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder. The air buzzed with nervous whispers. Some people avoided my gaze, ashamed they hadn't stood up to Derek. Others gave me quick, secret nods of support. At the front of the room stood Derek in a dark suit and polished shoes that gleamed under the harsh lights. He banged a gavel against the podium, as if this suburban clubhouse were a courtroom. On the table beside him sat a thick binder stuffed with violation notices, photographs, and letters. His arsenal of intimidation. He spotted me and smirked. "Ah, the man of the hour. Nice of you to finally show up." I didn't flinch. I just walked to the center of the room and took a seat in the front row, my shoebox of papers clutched under my arm. "Let's get this circus over with," I muttered. Derek began with flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Tonight we confront a threat to our neighborhood's values, a homeowner who has refused time and again to follow the rules we all live by. This man parks illegally, maintains eyesores, and openly mocks our community standards. He believes he's above the law." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. He flipped through his binder, holding up photographs. My truck, my mailbox, my cracked bird bath. Every violation documented, every refusal recorded. This man believes he can reject the authority of the HOA. But if we allow one person to defy us, What's to stop the rest? What happens when every yard becomes an overgrown mess? When every house is painted neon green? Chaos. That's what. He slammed the gavel, eyes blazing. And so, we are here to decide, will we allow this lawlessness to spread, or will we enforce order? He pointed straight at me. Tom, you will answer these charges. I stood slowly, the shoebox heavy in my hands. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. Derek, you've been sending me letters, slapping fines on my door, calling the cops on me. You've dragged me in front of my neighbors like some criminal. But let's get one thing straight. I'm not in your HOA. I never was. And everything you've done has been harassment. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Some nodded. Others frowned, uncertain. Derek sneered. That's what you keep saying. But boundaries shift. Bylaws evolve. Your property falls under my jurisdiction. I shook my head. That's where you're wrong. I opened the shoebox and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Copies of deeds, contracts, and county records. I laid them on the table with a heavy thud that echoed through the room. You want to talk about property lines? Here's the legal deed to my house. Here's the map showing my land outside the HOA boundaries. Black and white, signed, sealed, recorded. You've had no authority over me this entire time. Gasps. Someone in the back muttered, He's right. Derek's face twitched, but he recovered quickly. Even if that's true, you've still disrespected the community. You've undermined me. That's when I smiled, for the first time in weeks. Undermined you? No, Derek. You did that to yourself, because while you were busy harassing me, you forgot to check one important detail. I pulled out one last document, thicker than the rest. I held it high so everyone could see. This is the deed to your house, Derek. Bought under one of my LLCs last year at the estate auction. You don't own it. I do. The room went dead silent. Neighbors stared, mouths open. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward, straining to see the paper in my hand. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade under the weight of the revelation. Derek froze. His eyes darted to the document, then back to me. Disbelief written across his face. You're lying, he stammered. I stepped closer, placing the deed right in front of him on the podium. Read it. Your name's not on it. Mine is. You're not the king of this street, Derek. You're my tenant. Gasps turned to murmurs, murmurs to laughter. A woman in the back actually clapped. Derek's confidence crumbled in real time. His hands shook as he fumbled with the paper, scanning it, searching for some loophole that wasn't there. His face flushed red, then pale. This can't be, he whispered. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear. You've been bullying your landlord, Derek, and every letter, every fine, every stunt you pulled, I've got it all documented. Harassment, fraud, abuse of authority. You're finished. His gavel slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound rang like a bell marking the end of his reign. The neighbors erupted. Some laughed openly. Others cheered. For the first time, people weren't afraid of him. They were angry. At him. Mrs. Patterson stood and wagged a finger. You fined me for my shutters. You had no right. The single mom shouted. You made me pay $200 for trash cans. I want my money back. One by one, voices rose, the tide turning against him. Derek backed away from the podium, his face twisted in panic as the crowd closed in. The irony was complete. The man who ruled with fear was now the one surrounded, powerless. And just when it couldn't get worse for him, the two police officers from that night stepped into the back of the room. Someone must have called them about the noise. They pushed through the crowd, stopping at the front where Derek stood trembling. Sir, one officer said calmly, is there a problem here? I folded my arms. No problem. Just a man pretending to have authority he never had. Turns out he's been harassing his landlord. The officer raised a brow at Derek. Is that true? Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The officer sighed. You'll want to stop before this gets uglier. Harassing tenants is one thing. Harassing your landlord? That's a whole different ballgame? The crowd laughed. Derek's shoulders slumped. That night ended with Derek stumbling out of the clubhouse, chased by boos and jeers. His power shattered, his secrets exposed, his reign over the neighborhood finished. But for me, it wasn't just about winning. It was about justice, about proving that bullies, no matter how loud or arrogant, always fall when faced with the truth. And as I stood in the parking lot, breathing in the crisp night air, I felt lighter than I had in months. The war was over, or so I thought, because the aftermath, the fallout of Derek's downfall, would ripple through the neighborhood in ways none of us could have imagined. The morning after Derek's collapse, the neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. For the first time in months, I stepped outside with my coffee and didn't see him patrolling with his clipboard. The air smelled cleaner, fresher. Neighbors who once hid behind curtains now strolled freely down the sidewalks. Some even stopped to chat with me, voices relieved, almost giddy. "Tom," Mrs. Patterson said, shaking her head with a chuckle, "I haven't slept that well in weeks. You should have seen his face when you dropped that deed on the table." I smiled. It was long overdue. But beneath the laughter, there was still tension, the kind that lingers after a long storm. Derek wasn't gone yet. He still lived in that house, and the aftermath of his arrogance had left scars. Over the next few weeks, Derek became a ghost. He stopped strutting through the neighborhood. No more letters, no more fines. His once pristine yard grew shaggy, weeds pushing through the mulch. The smug suit and tie HOA president was reduced to a shadow, skulking to his mailbox at dawn or dusk, avoiding eye contact. Word spread quickly that he'd been ousted from the HOA board. A petition had circulated that very night in the clubhouse, signed by nearly everyone. The association couldn't risk the liability of keeping him in charge after my revelation. And then came the legal side. I met with my lawyer, laid out every letter, every bogus fine, every photo of vandalism. "You've got him dead to rights," my lawyer said. "Harassment, abuse of authority, potential fraud. He'll be lucky if all he faces is eviction." The irony was rich. The man who tried to police me out of my own home was now one missed rent payment away from being shown the door. But the real victory wasn't just over Derek. It was what happened among the neighbors. For months, they'd been living under his thumb, too afraid to push back. But once the truth came out, once they saw he could bleed, something changed. The single mom he fined for trash cans? She marched right up to him one evening, demanded her $200 back. And when he tried to brush her off, 3 other neighbors stood beside her, arms crossed, backing her up. He folded immediately. The older couple with the painted shutters? They repainted them bright blue just out of spite, laughing as they did it. No one dared say a word. For the first time in a long time, the street belonged to us again. The people who actually lived there, not the petty tyrant who tried to rule it. One night, sitting alone on my porch, I thought about everything that had happened. The flashing lights, the fear, the anger that ate at me for weeks. And then I thought about my wife. She'd loved this house, this street. She'd picked out the bird bath that Derek had cracked, planted the roses that grew along the fence. To me, this place wasn't just real estate. It was a memory. It was dignity. That's what Derek had never understood. For him, power was about control, forcing people into boxes, making them bend to his rules. For me, it was about freedom, the freedom to sit in my yard without fear, to park my truck in my driveway, to keep my wife's bird bath where it belonged. And in the end, that's why he lost. Because arrogance can push people only so far. Eventually, truth and dignity win. A month later, Derek's house went dark. A moving truck rolled up early one morning, and by sundown, he was gone. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just silence. I watched from my porch as the truck rumbled away. Neighbors stood beside me, cheering quietly, relief etched on their faces. "Good riddance," someone muttered. "Never again," another added. The house sat empty for a while after that. The grass grew long, the shutters faded. But to me, it looked better than it ever had under Derek's reign. Empty and quiet, a symbol of freedom restored. Looking back now, I realize this story isn't just about one arrogant HOA president or one stubborn old man who refused to bend. It's about something bigger. It's about how fragile dignity can feel when someone tries to strip it away, and how powerful it is when you fight to keep it. It's about community and how fear can silence people, but truth can set them free. And it's about standing your ground, because bullies thrive on silence, on the belief that no one will push back. But when you do, when you plant your feet and say enough, they crumble. I'm 60 years old. I've buried loved ones, built houses from the ground up, and lived long enough to know life doesn't hand you many wins. But that night, under those fluorescent lights, when I dropped the deed on that podium and watched Derek's face collapse, that was a win I'll never forget. I leaned back in my rocking chair, the evening sun painting the street gold. Kids rode their bikes down the sidewalk, laughter filling the air. My truck sat in the driveway, gleaming proudly. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. And as I sipped my coffee, I whispered into the quiet air, a promise to myself, to my wife, and to the neighborhood that had finally found its voice again. Never again will we let someone like Derek hold power over us. Not here, not ever.